Hello and welcome again to Gosho Readings by Elisa. We will be continuing the Gosho on establishing the correct teaching for the peace of the land. We left off after the first recording on page 10, where the host ended saying, because of this, the benevolent deities and sages abandon the nation and leave their accustomed places. As a result, demons and evil spirits bring about disasters and cause calamities. So we will continue now for about 30 minutes, starting with the response to this lengthy passage by the guest. The guest thereupon flushed with anger and said, Emperor Ming of the later Han Dynasty, having comprehended the significance of his dream of a golden man, welcomed the teachings of Buddhism brought by white horses. Prince Jogu, having put down the rebellion of Maurya, an opponent of Buddhism, proceeded to construct temples and pagodas. Since that time, from the ruler on down to the common people, all have worshipped the Buddha images and devoted their attention to the scriptures. As a result, in the monasteries of Mount Hiei and the southern capital at Nara, and the temples of Onjoji and Toji, throughout the land bounded by the four seas, in the 5 provinces of the capital area and along the 7 marches, Buddha images and Buddhist scriptures have been ranged like stars in the sky, and halls of worship have spread like clouds. Those who belong to the lineage of Shariputra meditate on the moon atop Eagle Peak, while those who adhere to the traditions of Haklenayashas transmit the teachings of Mount Kukutapada. How then can anyone say that the teachings of the Buddha's lifetime are despised, or that the 3 treasures of Buddhism have ceased to exist? If there is evidence to support such a contention, I would like to hear all the facts. The host, anxious to clarify his words, replied, to be sure, Buddhist halls stand rooftop to rooftop, and sutra storehouses are ranged eave to eave. Priests are as numerous as bamboo plants and rushes, monks as common as rice and hemp seedlings. The temples and priests have been honored from centuries past, and every day respect is paid them anew. But the monks and priests today are fawning and devious, and they confuse the people and lead them astray. The ruler and his subjects lack understanding and fail to distinguish between what is correct and what is erroneous. The Benevolent King's Sutra, for example, says, quote, evil monks hoping to gain fame and profit in many cases appear before the ruler, the crown prince, or the other princes, and take it upon themselves to preach doctrines that lead to the violation of the Buddhist law and the destruction of the nation. The ruler, failing to perceive the truth of the situation, listens to and puts faith in such doctrines and proceeds to create regulations that are perverse in nature and that do not accord with the rules of Buddhist discipline. In this way, he brings about the destruction of Buddhism and of the nation, unquote. The Nirvana Sutra states, quote, Bodhisattvas have no fear of mad elephants. What you should fear are evil friends. Even if you are killed by a mad elephant, you will not fall into the 3 evil paths. But if you are killed by an evil friend, you are certain to fall into them, unquote. The Lotus Sutra says, quote, in that evil age, there will be monks with perverse wisdom and hearts that are fawning and crooked, who will suppose they have attained what they have not attained, being proud and boastful in heart. Or there will be forest-dwelling monks wearing clothing of patched rags and living in retirement, who will claim they are practicing the true way, despising and looking down on all humankind. Greedy for profit and support, they will preach the law to white-robed laymen and will be respected and revered by the world as though they were arhats who possess the 6 transcendental powers. Because in the midst of the great assembly, they constantly try to defame us, they will address the rulers, high ministers, Brahmins, and householders, as well as the other monks, slandering and speaking evil of us, saying, "These are men of perverted views who preach non-Buddhist doctrines." In a muddied kalpa, in an evil age, there will be many things to fear. There will be many things to fear. Evil demons will take possession of others and through them curse, revile, and heap shame on us. The evil monks of that muddied age, failing to understand the Buddha's expedient means, how he preaches the law in accordance with what is appropriate, will confront us with foul language and angry frowns. Again and again, we will be banished. Unquote. The Nirvana Sutra says, quote, "After I have passed away and countless hundreds of years have gone by, the sages of the 4 stages too will have all passed away. After the former day of the law has ended and the middle day of the law has begun, there will be monks who will give the appearance of abiding by the rules of monastic discipline, but they will scarcely ever read or recite the sutras and instead will crave all kinds of food and drink to nourish their bodies. Though they wear the clothes of a monk, they will go about searching for alms like so many huntsmen who, narrowing their eyes, stalk softly. They will be like a cat on the prowl for mice. And they will constantly reiterate these words, 'I have attained arhatship.' Outwardly, they will seem to be wise and good, but within, they will harbor greed and jealousy. And when they are asked to preach the teachings, they will say nothing, like Brahmins who have taken a vow of silence. They are not true monks. They merely have the appearance of monks, consumed by their erroneous views. They slander the correct teaching." Unquote. When we look at the world in the light of these passages of scripture, we see that the situation is just as they describe it. If we do not admonish the evil priests, how can we hope to do good? The guest, growing more indignant than ever, said, "A wise monarch, by acting in accord with heaven and earth, perfects his rule. A sage, by distinguishing between right and wrong, brings order to the world. The monks and priests of the world today enjoy the confidence of the entire empire. If they were in fact evil monks, then the wise ruler would put no trust in them. If they were not true sages, then worthies and learned persons would not look up to them. But now, since worthies and sages do in fact honor and respect them, they must be nothing less than paragons of their kind. Why then do you pour out these wild accusations and dare to slander them? To whom are you referring when you speak of evil monks? I would like an explanation." The host said, "In the time of the retired Emperor Gotoba, there was a priest named Honen who wrote a work entitled The Nembutsu Chosen Above All. He contradicted the sacred teachings of the Buddha's entire lifetime and brought confusion to people in every direction. Nembutsu Chosen Above All states, quote, regarding the passage in which the meditation master Ta Chao distinguished between the sacred way teachings and the Pure Land teachings and urged people to abandon the former and immediately embrace the latter. First of all, there are 2 kinds of sacred way teachings, the Mahayana and the Hinayana he's referring to. Judging from this, we may assume that the esoteric Mahayana teachings and the true Mahayana teachings are both included in the sacred way. If that is so, then the 8 present-day schools, the true word, Zen, Tendai, flower garland, 3 treatises, Dharma characteristics, treatise on the 10 stages sutra, and summary of the Mahayana are all included in the sacred way that is to be abandoned. The Dharma teacher Tan Lao in Tan Luan in his commentary on the treatise of the birth in the Pure Land, states, quote, I note that Bodhisattva Nagarjuna's commentary on the 10 Stages Sutra says, quote, there are two ways by which a bodhisattva may reach the state of avaivartika, or non-retrogression. One is the difficult to practice way, the other is the easy to practice way, unquote. Quote, the difficult to practice way is the same as the sacred way teachings, and the easy to practice way is the Pure Land teachings. Students of the Pure Land school should first of all understand this point. Though they may be people who have previously studied the sacred way teachings, if they wish to become followers of the Pure Land teachings, they must discard the sacred way and give their allegiance to the Pure Land teachings, unquote. Honen also says, quote, regarding the passage in which the Reverend Shan Tao distinguished between correct and sundry practices and urged people to abandon the sundry and embrace the correct, concerning the first of the sundry practices, that of reading and reciting sutras, with the exception of the recitation of the meditation on the Buddha Infinite Life Sutra and the other sutras that preach rebirth in the Pure Land, the embracing, reading, and recitation of all other sutras, whether Mahayana or Hinayana, exoteric or esoteric, is to be regarded as a sundry practice. Concerning the third of the sundry practices, that of worshiping, with the exception of worshiping the Buddha Amida, the worshiping or honoring of any other Buddha or Bodhisattva or deity of this world is to be regarded as a sundry practice. In the light of this statement, I declare that one should abandon such sundry practices and concentrate upon the practice of the Pure Land teachings. What reason would we have to abandon the correct practices of the Pure Land teachings, which ensure that out of 100 persons, all 100 will be reborn in the Pure Land, and cling instead to the various sundry practices and procedures, which could not save even one person in 1,000? Followers of the way should ponder this carefully, unquote. Honen further states, quote, in the Chen Yuan era catalog of the Buddhist canon, we find it recorded that from the 600 volumes of the Great Wisdom Sutra to the Eternity of the Law Sutra, the exoteric and esoteric sutras of Mahayana, or the Great Vehicle, total 637 works in 2,883 volumes. The phrase from the Meditation Sutra, quote, reading and reciting the Great Vehicle, unquote, should be applied to all these works. You should understand that when the Buddha was preaching according to the capacity of his various listeners, he, for a time, taught the two methods of concentrated meditation and unconcentrated meditation. But later, when he revealed his own enlightenment, he ceased to teach these two methods. The only teaching that, once revealed, shall never cease to be taught is the single doctrine of the Nembutsu, unquote. Honen also states, quote, regarding the passage that says that the practitioner of the Nembutsu must possess 3 kinds of mind, it is found in the Meditation Sutra. In his commentary on that sutra, Shan Tao says, someone may ask, if there are those who differ in understanding and practice from the followers of Nembutsu, persons of distorted and mistaken belief, how should we confront them? I will now make certain that their perverse and differing views will not cause trouble. These persons of evil views with different understanding and different practices are compared to a band of robbers who call back the traveler who has already gone 1 or 2 steps along his journey. In my opinion, when this commentary speaks of different understanding, different practices, varying doctrines, and varying beliefs, they are referring to the teachings of the sacred way, unquote. Finally, in a concluding passage, Honen says, quote, if one wishes to escape quickly from the sufferings of birth and death, one should confront these 2 superior teachings and then proceed to put aside the teachings of the sacred way and choose those of the Pure Land. And if one wishes to follow the teachings of the Pure Land, one should confront the correct and sundry practices and then proceed to abandon all of the sundry and devote one's entire attention to the correct, unquote. Post is continuing now. When we examine these passages, we see that Honen quotes the erroneous explanations of Tan Luan, Tao Chou, and Shan Tao, and establishes the categories of the sacred way and the Pure Land teachings, and of the difficult to practice and the easy to practice ways. He then takes all the 637 works in 2,883 volumes that comprise the Mahayana teachings of the Buddha's lifetime, including those of the Lotus Sutra and the True Word Sutras, along with all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and the deities of this world, and assigns them all to the categories of the Sacred Way teachings, the difficult to practice way, and the sundry practices, and urges people to, quote, discard, close, ignore, and abandon, quote, them. With these four injunctions, he leads all people astray. On top of that, he groups together all the sage monks of the three countries of India, China, and Japan, as well as the students of Buddhism of the 10 directions, and calls them a band of robbers, causing the people to insult them. In doing so, he turns his back on the passage in the three Pure Land Sutras, the sutras of his own school, which contain Amida's vow to save the people, quote, accepting only those who commit the 5 cardinal sins and those who slander the correct teaching, unquote. More fundamentally, he shows that he fails to understand the warning contained in the 2nd volume of the Lotus Sutra, the heart and core of the entire body of teachings the Buddha expounded in the 5 periods of his preaching life, which reads, quote, if a person fails to have faith, but instead slanders the sutra, when his life comes to an end, he will enter the Avicii hell, unquote. Now we have come to this latter age when people are no longer sages. Each enters his own dark road, and all alike forget the direct way. How pitiful that no one cures them of their blindness. How painful to see them taking up these false beliefs in vain. As a result, everyone from the ruler of the nation on down to the common people believes that there are no true sutras outside the 3 Pure Land Sutras and no Buddhas other than the Buddha Amida with his 2 attendants. Once there were men like Dengyo, Gishin, Jikaku, and Shisho, who journeyed 10,000 miles across the waves to China to acquire the sacred teachings, and there visited the mountains and rivers to pay reverence to Buddhist statues and carry them back. In some cases, they built holy temples on the peaks of high mountains in which to preserve those scriptures and statues. In other cases, they constructed sacred halls in the bottoms of deep valleys where such objects could be worshipped and honored. As a result, the Buddhas, Shakyamuni and Medicine Master, shone side by side, casting their influence upon present and future ages, while the Bodhisattva's space treasury and earth repository brought benefit to the living and the dead. The rulers of the nation contributed districts or villages so that lamps might continue to burn bright before the images, while the stewards of the great estates gave their fields and gardens as an offering. But because of this book by Honen, this Nembutsu chosen above all, the Lord of Teaching Shakyamuni is forgotten, and all honor is paid to Amida, the Buddha of the Western land. The transmission of the law from Shakyamuni Buddha is ignored, and Medicine Master, the thus come one of the Eastern region, is neglected. Attention is paid only to the 3 Pure Land Sutras in 4 volumes, and all the other wonderful scriptures that Shakyamuni expounded throughout the 5 periods of his preaching life are cast aside. If temples are not dedicated to Amida, then people no longer have any desire to support them or pay honor to the Buddhas enshrined there. If priests are not practitioners of the Nembutsu, then people quickly forget all about giving those priests alms. As a result, the halls of the Buddha have fallen into ruin, scarcely a wisp of smoke rising above their moss-covered roof tiles, and the priest quarters have become empty and dilapidated, the dew deep on the grasses in their courtyards. And in spite of such conditions, no one gives a thought to protecting the law or to restoring the temples. Hence, the sage priests who once presided over the temples leave and do not return, and the benevolent deities who guarded the nation depart and no longer appear. This has all come about because of this Nembutsu chosen above all by Honen. How pitiful to think that in the space of a few decades, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people have been deluded by these devilish teachings, and in so many cases, confused as to the true teachings of Buddhism. If people favor what is only incidental and forget what is primary, can the benevolent deities be anything but angry? If people cast aside what is perfect and take up what is biased, can the world escape the plots of demons? Rather than offering up 10,000 prayers for remedy, it would be better simply to outlaw this one evil. This time, the guest was truly enraged and said, "In the ages since our original teacher, the Buddha Shakyamuni, preached the 3 Pure Land Sutras, the Dharma teacher Tan Luan had originally studied the 4 treatises, but abandoned them and put all his faith in the Pure Land teachings. Similarly, the meditation master Tao Cho ceased to spread the various practices of the Nirvana Sutra and devoted all his attention to propagating the practice that leads one to the Western Pure Land. The Reverend Shan Tao discarded the sundry practices and established the single practice of the Nembutsu, and the supervisor of priests, Eishin, collected essential passages from various sutras to form his work, making the single practice of the Nembutsu the essence of his teaching. Such was the manner in which these men honored and respected the Buddha Amida, and uncountable numbers of people as a result were able to gain rebirth in the Pure Land. Of particular note was the sage Honen, who as a child entered the monastery on Mount Hiei. By the time he was 17, he had worked his way through all 60 volumes of Tendai literature and had investigated all the 8 schools and mastered their essentials. In addition, he had read through the entire body of sutras and treatises 7 times and exhausted all the works of exegesis and biography. His wisdom shone like the sun and moon, and his virtue exceeded that of the earlier teachers. In spite of all this, he was in doubt as to the proper path to emancipation and could not make out the true meaning of nirvana. Therefore, he read and examined all the texts he could, pondered deeply and considered every possibility, and in the end put aside all the sutras and concentrated on the single practice of the Nembutsu. In addition, he received confirmation of his decision when Shan Tao miraculously appeared to him in a dream, and he proceeded to spread his doctrines among friends and strangers in all 4 corners of the land. Thereafter, he was hailed as a reincarnation of Bodhisattva great power, or was revered as Shan Tao reborn. In every quarter, people of eminent and lowly birth alike bowed their heads in respect, and men and women from all over Japan sought him. Since that time, the springs and autumns have succeeded each other, and the years have piled upon years. And yet you insist upon putting aside the venerable teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha contained in the Pure Land Sutras and willfully speak evil of the passage describing the oath of the Buddha Amida. Why do you try to blame the sacred age of Honen for the disasters of recent years, going out of your way to slander the former teachers of Pure Land doctrines and to heap abuse on the sage Honen? You are, as the saying goes, deliberately blowing back the fur and hunting for flaws in the leather, deliberately piercing the skin in hopes of drawing blood. From ancient times to the present, the world has never seen such a speaker of evil. You had better learn a little caution and restraint. When you pile up such grave offenses, how can you hope to escape punishment? I am afraid even to sit here in your company. I must take up my staff and be on my way." The host, smiling, restrained his guest and said, Insects that live on smartweed forget how bitter it tastes. Those who stay long in privies forget how foul the smell is. Here you listen to my good words and think them wicked. Point to a slanderer of the law and call him a sage. Mistrust a correct teacher and take him for an evil priest. Your confusion is great indeed, and your offense anything but light. Listen to my explanation of how this confusion arose, and let us discuss the matter in detail. Shakyamuni Buddha expounded the 5 periods of doctrines, established the order in which they were preached, and divided them into the provisional and the true teachings. But Tan Luan, Tao Cho, and Shan Tao embraced the provisional teachings and forgot about the true ones, went by what had been taught in the earlier period of the Buddha's life, and discarded what was taught later. They were not the kind of men who delve into the deep places of Buddhist doctrine. Honen, in particular, though he followed the practices advocated by these earlier men, was ignorant as to their source. How do we know this? Because he lumped together all the 637 Mahayana scriptures in 2,883 volumes, and along with them all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and deities of this world, and urged people to discard, close, ignore, and abandon them, with these 4 injunctions corrupting the hearts of all people. Thus he poured out perverted words of his own invention and took absolutely no cognizance of the explanations put forth in the Buddhist scriptures. His is the worst kind of baseless talk, a clear case of defamation. There are no words to describe it, no way to censor it that is not too mild. And yet people all put faith in this baseless talk of his, and without exception pay honor to his Nembutsu chosen above all. As a consequence, they revere the 3 sutras of the Pure Land and cast all the other sutras aside. They look up to one Buddha alone, Amida of the land of perfect bliss, and forget about the other Buddhas. A man such as Honen is in truth the arch enemy of the Buddhas and the scriptures, and the foe of sage priests and ordinary men and women alike. And now his distorted teachings have spread throughout the 8 regions of the country, permeating the 10 directions. You became quite horrified when I blamed an earlier period for the disasters that have occurred in recent years. Perhaps I should cite a few examples from the past to show you that you are mistaken in your feelings. The 2nd volume of Great Concentration and Insight quotes a passage from Records of the Historian that says, quote, "In the closing years of the Chu dynasty, there were persons who let their hair hang down, went about naked to the waist, and did not observe the rites and regulations," unquote. The annotations on Great Concentration and Insight in the 2nd volume explains this passage by quoting from So's commentary on Spring and Autumn Annals as follows, quote, "When King Ping of the Chu first moved his capital to the east, he saw men by the Yi River who let their hair hang down and performed sacrifices in the fields. Someone who had great understanding said, 'In less than 100 years, the dynasty will fall, for the rites are already neglected,'" unquote. From this, it is evident that the portent appears first, and later the disaster itself comes about. The Great Concentration and Insight passage goes on to say, quote, "Juan Chi was a man of extraordinary talent, but he let his hair grow like a mass of brambles and left his belt undone. Later, the sons of the aristocracy all imitated him, until those who behaved in a churlish and insulting manner were thought to be acting quite naturally, and those who were restrained and proper in their behavior were ridiculed as mere peasants. This was a sign that the Suma family, the rulers of the Western Qin dynasty, would meet with their downfall," unquote. Similarly, the record of a pilgrimage to China in search of the law by the great teacher Jikaku states that in the first year of the Hui Chang era, 841, Emperor Wu Tsung of the Tang dynasty demanded the priest Qing Shuang of Chang Qing Shu Temple to transmit the Nembutsu teachings of the Buddha Amida in the various temples. Qing Shuang spent 3 days in each temple, going about from one temple to another without ever ceasing. In the second year of the same era, soldiers from the land of Uyghurs invaded the borders of the Tang Empire. In the third year of the same era, the regional commander in the area north of the Yellow River suddenly raised a revolt. Later, the kingdom of Tibet once more refused to obey orders from China, and the Uyghurs repeatedly seized Chinese territory. On the whole, the conflicts and uprisings were like those that prevailed at the time when the Qin dynasty and the military leader Shang Yu were overthrown, and the towns and villages were devastated by fire and other disasters. What was even worse, Emperor Wu Song carried out a vast campaign to wipe out Buddhist teachings and destroyed a great many temples and pagodas. He was never able to put down the uprisings and died in agony shortly after. This is the essence of Jikaku's original passage. In view of these events, we should consider the fact that Honen belonged to the time of the retired Emperor Gotaba, around the Kennin era, or 1201 to 1204. And what happened to the retired emperor is evident before our eyes. Thus, Tang China provided an earlier example of the fall of an emperor, and our own country offers similar proof. You should neither doubt this nor consider it strange. The only thing to do now is to abandon the evil ways and take up those that are good, to cut off this affliction at the source, to cut it off at the root. The guest, looking somewhat mollified, said, "Though I have not yet probed deeply into the matter, I believe I understand to some degree what you are saying. Nevertheless, throughout the area from Kyoto, the capital, to Kamakura, the headquarters of the shogun, there are numerous eminent Buddhist leaders and key figures in the clergy, and yet none of them has so far appealed to the shogun concerning this affair or submitted a memorial to the throne. You, on the other hand, a person of humble position, think nothing of spewing out offensive accusations. Your assertion goes too far, and your behavior is unreasonable." The host said, "Though I may be a person of little ability, I have reverently given myself to the study of the Mahayana. A blue fly, if it clings to the tail of a thoroughbred horse, can travel 10,000 miles, and the green ivy that twines around the tall pine can grow to 1,000 feet. I was born as the son of the one Buddha Shakyamuni, and I serve the king of scriptures, the Lotus Sutra. How could I observe the decline of the Buddhist law and not be filled with emotions of pity and distress? Moreover, the Nirvana Sutra states, quote, if even a good monk sees someone destroying the teaching and disregards him, failing to reproach him, to oust him, or to punish him for his offense, then you should realize that that monk is betraying the Buddha's teachings. But if he ousts the destroyer of the law, reproaches him, or punishes him, then he is my disciple and a true voice hearer, unquote. Although I may not be a good monk, I certainly do not want to be accused of betraying the Buddha's teaching. Therefore, in order to avoid such charges, I have cited a few general principles and given a rough explanation of the matter. Earlier in the Genin era of 1224 to 1225, petitions to the throne were submitted time and again by the two temples of Enryakuji and Kofukuji, and as a result, an imperial command and a letter of instructions from the shogunate were handed down, ordering that the wood blocks used in printing Honen's Nembutsu chosen above all, be confiscated and brought to the great lecture hall of Enryakuji. There they were burned in order to repay the debt owed to the Buddhas of the three existences. In addition, orders were given that the menials at Kanjinin Shrine should dig up and destroy Honen's grave. Then Honen's disciples, Ryukan, Shoko, Jokaku, Sasho, and others were condemned by the imperial court to exile in distant regions and were never pardoned. In view of these facts, how can you say that no one has submitted a complaint to the authorities concerning these matters? The guest, continuing to speak in a mild manner, replied, one could hardly say that Honen is the only one who disparages sutras and speaks ill of other priests, since you do the same yourself. However, it is true that he takes the 637 Mahayana scriptures in 2,883 volumes, along with all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and the deities of the world, and urges people to discard, close, ignore, and abandon them. There is no doubt that these four injunctions are his very words. The meaning of the passage is quite clear. But you keep harping on this one little flaw in the jewel and severely slandering him for it. I do not know whether he spoke out of delusion or out of enlightenment. Between you and Honen, I cannot tell which is wise and which is foolish, or determine whose assertions are right and whose are wrong. However, you assert that all the recent disasters are to be traced to the Nembutsu chosen above all, speaking quite volubly on that point and elaborating on the meaning of your assertion. Now, surely the peace of the world and the stability of the nation are sought by both ruler and subject and desired by all inhabitants of the country. The nation achieves prosperity through the Buddhist law, and the law is proven worthy of reverence by the people who embrace it. If the nation is destroyed and the people are wiped out, then who will continue to pay reverence to the Buddhas? Who will continue to have faith in the law? Therefore, one must first of all pray for the safety of the nation and then work to establish the Buddhist law. Now, if you know of any means whereby disasters can be prevented and troubles brought to an end, I would like to hear about it. The host said, there is no doubt that I am the foolish one. I would never dare claim to be wise. However, I would just like to quote some passages from the scriptures and offer some brief thoughts. Concerning the means for ensuring order in the nation, there are numerous passages in both Buddhist and non-Buddhist texts, and it would be difficult to cite them all here. Since taking up the study of Buddhism, however, I have frequently given thought to this matter, and it seems to me that restraining those who slander the law and respecting the followers of the correct way will assure stability within the nation and peace in the world at large. In the Nirvana Sutra, we read, quote, the Buddha said, with the exception of one type of person, you may offer alms to all kinds of persons, and everyone will praise you. Chunda said, what do you mean when you speak of one type of person? The Buddha replied, I mean the type described in this sutra as violators of the precepts. Chunda spoke again, saying, I am afraid I still do not understand. May I ask you to explain further? The Buddha addressed Chunda, saying, by violators of the precepts, I mean the Ikchantika. In the case of all other types of persons, you may offer alms. Everyone will praise you, and you will achieve great rewards. Chunda spoke once more, asking, what is the meaning of the term Ikchantika? The Buddha said, Chunda, suppose there should be monks or nuns, laymen or women who speak careless and evil words and slander the correct teaching, and that they should go on committing these grave acts without ever showing any inclination to reform or any sign of repentance in their hearts. Persons of this kind, I would say, are following the path of the Ikchantika. Again, there are maybe those who commit the 4 grave offenses or are guilty of the 5 cardinal sins, and who, though aware that they are guilty of serious faults, from the beginning have no trace of fear or contrition in their hearts, or if they do, give no outward sign of it. When it comes to the correct teaching, they show no inclination to protect, treasure, and establish it over the ages, but rather speak of it with malice and contempt, their words replete with error. People of this kind, too, I would say, are following the path of the Ikchantika. With the exception of this one group of people called Ikchantika, however, you may offer alms to all others, and everyone will praise you. End quote. Elsewhere in the same sutra, the Buddha spoke in these words, quote, "When I recall the past, I remember that I was the king of a great state in this continent of Jambudvipa. My name was Senyo, and I loved and venerated the great vehicle scriptures. My heart was pure and good and had no trace of evil, jealousy, or stinginess. Good men, at that time I cherished the great vehicle teachings in my heart. When I heard the Brahmins slandering these correct and equal sutras, I put them to death on the spot. Good men, as a result of that action, I never thereafter fell into hell," unquote. In another passage, it says, quote, "In the past, when the thus come one was the ruler of a nation and practiced the way of the Bodhisattva, he put to death a number of Brahmins," unquote. And it says, quote, "There are 3 degrees of killing, the lower, middle, and upper degrees. The lower degree constitutes the killing of any humble being, from an ant to any of the various kinds of animals. But the killing of any being that a bodhisattva has chosen to be born as to help other living beings is excluded. As a result of a killing of the lower degree, one will fall into the realms of hell, hungry spirits, and animals, and will suffer all the pains appropriate to a killing of the lower degree. Why should this be? Because even animals and other humble beings possess the roots of goodness, insignificant though those roots may be. That is why a person who kills such a being must suffer full retribution for his offense. Killing any person from an ordinary mortal to an anagamin, which is a non-returner, one who has reached the 3rd of the 4 stages that voice hearers can attain. The 4th and highest stage is that of Arhat. So back to the quote, "Killing any person from an ordinary mortal to an anagamin constitutes what is termed the middle degree. As a consequence of such an act of killing, one will fall into the realms of hell, hungry spirits, and animals, and will suffer all the pains appropriate to a killing of the middle degree. The upper degree of killing refers to the killing of a parent, an arhat, a pratyeka Buddha, or a bodhisattva who has reached the stage of non-retrogression. For such a crime, one will fall into the great Avicii hell. Good men, if someone were to kill an Ikchantika, that killing would not fall into any of the 3 categories just mentioned. Good men, the various Brahmins that I have said were put to death, all of them were in fact Ikchantikas," unquote. In the Benevolent King Sutra, we read, quote, "The Buddha announced to King Prasenajit, 'Thus I entrust the protection of my teachings to the ruler of the nation rather than to the monks and nuns. Why do I do so? Because they do not possess the kind of power and authority that the king has,' unquote." The Nirvana Sutra states, quote, "Now I entrust the correct teaching, which is unexcelled, to the rulers, the ministers, the high officials, and the 4 kinds of Buddhists. If anyone should vilify the correct teaching, then the ministers and the 4 kinds of Buddhists should reprimand him and bring him to order," unquote. It also states, quote, "The Buddha replied, 'Bodhisattva Kashyapa, it is because I was a defender of the correct teaching that I have been able to attain this diamond-like body. Good man, defenders of the correct teaching need not observe the 5 precepts or practice the rules of proper behavior. Rather, they should carry knives and swords, bows and arrows, halberds and lances, unquote. Again, the Buddha said, quote, even though there may be those who observe the 5 precepts, they do not deserve to be called practitioners of the great vehicle. But even if one does not observe the 5 precepts, if one defends the correct teaching, then one may be called a practitioner of the great vehicle. Defenders of the correct teaching ought to arm themselves with knives and swords, weapons and staves. Even though they carry swords and staves, I would call them men who observe the precepts, unquote. The Buddha likewise said, quote, good man, in past ages, in this very city of Kushinagara, a Buddha appeared whose name was the thus come one, joy increasing. After this Buddha passed away, the correct teaching that he had taught remained in the world for countless millions of years. Finally, only 40 more years were left before the Buddha's teaching was due to come to an end. At that time, there was a monk named Realization of Virtue who observed the precepts. There were many monks at this time who violated the precepts, and when they heard this monk preaching, they all conceived evil designs in their hearts, and arming themselves with swords and staves, approached this teacher of the law. At this time, the ruler of the kingdom was named Possessor of Virtue. He received reports of what was happening, and in order to defend the teaching, he went at once to the place where the monks were preaching the law and fought with all his might against the evil monks who broke the precepts. As a result, the monk who had been preaching was able to escape grievous injury. But the king received so many wounds from knives and swords, halberds and lances, that there was not a spot on his body the size of a mustard seed that remained unharmed. At this time, the monk Realization of Virtue praised the king, saying, splendid, splendid. You, O king, are now a true defender of the correct teaching. In ages to come, this body of yours will surely become a boundless vessel of the law. At that time, the king had already heard the teaching, and he felt great joy in his heart. Thereupon his life came to an end, and he was reborn in the land of the Buddha Akshobhya, where he became the Buddha's principal disciple. Moreover, all the military leaders, citizens, and associates of the king who had fought beside him or had rejoiced in his effort were filled with an unflagging determination to achieve enlightenment. And when they died, all of them were reborn in the land of the Buddha Akshobhya. Later, the monk Realization of Virtue also died, and he too was born in the land of the Buddha Akshobhya, where he became second among the Buddha's voice hearer disciples. Thus, if the correct teaching is about to come to an end, this is the way one ought to support and defend it. Kashyapa, the king who lived at the time, was I myself, and the monk who preached was the Buddha Kashyapa. Kashyapa, those who defend the correct teaching enjoy this kind of boundless reward. As a consequence, I have been able to obtain the distinguished characteristics that I possess today, to adorn myself with them, and to put on the Dharma body that can never be destroyed, unquote. Then the Buddha declared to Bodhisattva Kashyapa, for this reason, quote, for this reason, laymen believers and others who wish to defend the law should arm themselves with swords and staves and protect it in this manner. Good man, in the age of impurity and evil, after I have passed away, the nation will fall into devastation and disorder. Men will plunder and steal from one another, and the common people will be reduced to starvation. Because of hunger, many men at that time will declare their determination to leave their families and become monks. Men such as these may be called shave-pates. When this crowd of shave-pates sees anyone who is attempting to protect the correct teaching, they will chase after him and drive him away, or even kill him or do him injury. That is why I now give permission for monks who observe the precepts to associate with and keep company with white-robed laymen who bear swords and staves. Even though they carry swords and staves, I would call them men who observe the precepts. But although they may carry swords and staves, they should never use them to take life, unquote. The Lotus Sutra says, quote, if a person fails to have faith, but instead slanders this sutra, immediately he will destroy all the seeds for becoming a Buddha in this world. When his life comes to an end, he will enter the Avicii hell, unquote. The meaning of these passages from the sutras is perfectly clear. What need is there for me to add any further explanation? If we accept the words of the Lotus Sutra, then we must understand that slandering the Mahayana scriptures is more serious than committing the 5 cardinal sins countless times. Therefore, one who does so will be confined in the great citadel of the Avicii hell and cannot hope for release for an immeasurable length of time. According to the Nirvana Sutra, even though you may give alms to a person who has committed the 5 cardinal sins, you must never give alms to a person who has slandered the law. One who kills so much as an ant will invariably fall into the 3 evil paths, but one who helps eradicate slander of the law will ascend to the state from which there can be no retrogression. Thus, the passage tells us that the monk realization of virtue was reborn as the Buddha Kashyapa, and that king possessor of virtue was reborn as the Buddha Shakyamuni. The lotus and the Nirvana Sutras represent the very heart of the doctrines of Shakyamuni that Shakyamuni preached during the 5 periods of his teaching life. Their warnings must be viewed with the utmost gravity. Who would fail to heed them? And yet those people who forget about the correct way and slander the law put more trust than ever in Honins, Nembutsu Chosen above all, and grow blinder than ever in their foolishness. Thus some of them, remembering how their master looked in life, fashion wooden sculptures and paintings of him, while others, putting faith in his perverse teachings, carve wood blocks with which to print his ugly words. These writings they scattered about throughout the area bounded by the seas, carrying them beyond the cities and into the countryside until wherever honor is paid, it is to the practices of this school, and wherever alms are given, it is to priests of this school. As a result, we see people cutting off the fingers of the images of Shakyamuni and refashioning them to form the gesture of Amida, or converting the temples formerly dedicated to Medicine Master, the thus come one of the eastern region, and replacing his statues with those of Amida, the thus come one of the western land. Or we find the ceremony of copying the Lotus Sutra, which had been carried out for over 400 years on Mount Hiei, being suspended, and the copying of the 3 Pure Land Sutras substituted in its place, or the annual lectures on the doctrines of the great teacher Chen Tai being replaced by lectures on the teachings of Shan Tao. Indeed, the slanderous people and their associates are too numerous to count. Are they not destroyers of the Buddha? Are they not destroyers of the law? Are they not destroyers of the Buddhist order? And all their distorted teachings derive from Nembutsu Chosen above all. Alas, how pitiful that people should turn their backs on the true words of prohibition spoken by the thus come one Shakyamuni. How tragic that they should heed the gross and deluded words of this ignorant priest. If we hope to bring order and tranquility to the world without further delay, we must put an end to these slanders of the law that fill the country. Thank you for listening to part 2 of On Establishing the True Teaching Gosho. Thank you for putting up with my occasional struggles with some of the unfamiliar words. I appreciate your patience. In the next reading, I will continue from this page 22 and see how far I can get towards the end, which is page 30. And again, I appreciate your attention, sharing this with anyone who might appreciate hearing the Gosho read aloud. And if you like this video, please like and or subscribe to look at the other videos or continue receiving these recordings. Thank you, and peace to you and to your land.